the coast or onshore on Thursday. So, and then you go, you add 2 or 3 days after that as we get up toward the northeast coast. It is absolutely a possibility. I wouldn't take my eyes off it. So, yes.
All right, Jim.
Great questions, by the way, guys. I'm really impressed with these questions.
Yeah, and then, of course, there's the fact that the hurricane hunters have found a strengthening system. It's still going. It's still going strong. And I think a lot of people are wondering, could it weaken? Could it miss the East Coast altogether, Jim?
It could. As a matter of fact, the last 2 days, back on AMHQ in the morning, which is our morning show, that was a valid possibility. That it would stay off the coast, as was coming into Florida, as was going into the eastern Gulf. All right, that was a possibility. Right. But it looks, yesterday afternoon there was a major shift in the guidance, and all of the guidance had it offshore. So that is a bit of good news, without a doubt. All right, and hopefully it'll stay there. That shift to the east, even for the Carolinas, is absolutely possible. But please, guys, Kelly, Reynolds, you know as well as I do, sometimes we see a shift back.
Right.
That's right. So let's not take our eyes off it.
Got to stay vigilant, no question about it. Looks like no such luck for the Bahamas, though. My goodness.
Yeah, be sure to send us your hurricane questions, by the way, using the hashtag hurricane questions, and we'll do our best to answer those questions right here on the Weather Channel as our coverage continues throughout the day and into the evening hours.
As Hurricane Dorian threatens to ruin Labor Day plans across parts of the southeast, we're going to check in some other parts of the country. This is the upper Midwest and parts of the lakes, Great Lakes.
And, of course, we still have a very dangerous hurricane on our hands with Dorian. In case you haven't joined us in the last hour or so, it's intensified. The hurricane hunters are out there. They see a wind now that is up to 145 miles per hour. So we're still at Cat 4 strength. Remember, we'd have to get to 160 to be a Category 5. But either way, a very dangerous hurricane is the bottom line. There's been some major adjustments in both the guidance that we look at and also the track from the Hurricane Center. But that does not mean that Florida will. Martin County, very interesting place, because if you go back to 2004, Reynolds and Kelly, this is where both Francis and Jean made landfall on the barrier island, about a mile apart from each other in 2004. So this place is no stranger to hurricanes, and we'll talk more about the impacts of having a hurricane offshore like Matthew was back in 2016 in just a moment. But let's go back to Kelly and Reynolds in the studio.
I think it was Jean that did a loop-de-loop.
I think you're right.
And then came back to Florida. So these things can do, weird turns. So
double landfalls.
Right, double landfall, exactly. So we're going to talk more about the path and what we think Dorian is going to be doing in the future. But check this out. Getting up close and personal to Dorian. The hurricane hunters flew into the hurricane yesterday, getting those detailed measurements of the wind, the pressure. This is the 6th mission for the plane Kermit. The hurricane hunters could fly back into Dorian later on today. I know they've been flying in it this morning, Reynolds, and that's when they discovered, the pressure's dropping and the winds have responded, now up to 145 miles per hour.
Strongest storm on the planet right now. Think about that for a moment. What's interesting, too, is that when you saw Jim shot a moment ago in Stuart, Florida, you had almost serenity in terms of what was happening. But here you see sheer hell breaking out in the atmosphere. The new advisories, as Kelly mentioned a while ago, we have winds now of 145 miles an hour. And if you look at from high above to the ground below, or rather the water as it were, you can still see it spinning. A great friend of mine, Captain Bobby Hooks, who actually sails out of Lake Worth, Florida, I can tell you that he moved a lot of his boats from this point way down here to the Keys to try to get out of the way of the system. A lot of people are doing that. They're preparing in every way because as of last night, this thing was going right towards the Bahamas and still appears that it's going to do that. The strengthening, we talked about that. How can you not? What a story this has been. You go from 8 o'clock in the morning yesterday, strong in its own right with winds of 110 miles an hour. And wow, launching like a Saturn V rocket all the way up to 145 and up it goes. And here it comes. Look at this. The eye very well defined. Much of the convection you see, plenty of it surrounding the eye itself, but still this buzzsaw launching its way towards the Bahamas. Water vapor imagery, you got it there. And where you had the green, well, you've got more of that moisture in the atmosphere, and it is making its way right towards parts of Freeport, Nassau, and the Bahamas. That's where we have a hurricane warnings, but a hurricane watch farther to the south. Looks like the brunt of the winds moving through places like Freeport, as we mentioned. Next 30 seconds or so, we show you the story. By Sunday afternoon and evening, winds chugging along at 145. Could it get up to 160? Could that happen? Could we get a Category 5? It's possible. it is possible. But the inverse is true, too. We may see some weakening. But for now, the forecast shows more of a trend of it going west than going more north. That being said, Florida is still in the cone. Do not let your guard down. Georgia, also in the cone. And now we're including parts of the Carolinas. So we need to be in a state of preparedness. If you get those evacuation orders, you need to heed them. And Kelly, as you mentioned, and Jim has too, last hour, even if this were to skim its way along the coastline, we're still seeing very dangerous impacts for much of the coast and farther inland. We got to be ready for it.
And the cone is just for the center.
That's right.
It doesn't
That's right.
include the entire storm,
Absolutely
which
right.
goes pretty far out, by the way. So just keep that in mind as well. And we begin our live coverage along Florida's east coast, the Atlantic coast, in the city of Stuart, Florida. Jim Cantori is there with how preparations are going and even evacuations, Jim, for some of those barrier islands.
Yeah, so we're in Martin County. This is the Treasure Coast, by the way. And off to my east a little bit from where I am in Stuart here is beautiful Hutchinson Island. And this is that barrier island where Gina and Francis did make at least one of their landfalls. But of course, think about where we were in Florida 2 days ago. All of a sudden, we're looking at a potential perpendicular landfall to the coast of a major hurricane, Cat 3 and then eventually Cat 4. So preparations just went crazy. And you know what? That may be happening this morning in another place up the road, since now South Carolina and North Carolina are in the cone. I'm going to bring in Shannon Schaff. He is the director of Charleston Emergency Management in beautiful Charleston, South Carolina, the holy city, one of my favorite cities in the Southeast. Shannon, thanks for talking to us this morning. Let's talk about how things have changed with you with this change with the cone.
Well, good morning, Jim. We've been kind of bracing for this now for a little bit. We met with our city officials yesterday, with the mayor and others. And, we kind of halfway expected it could take a shift. You guys have been forecasting that. So we're taking this very seriously. We're addressing it with our super plane pumps and clearing drains and everything. So we kind of halfway.
Shannon, we're getting a little breakup of your signal, but I got the gist, and hopefully our viewers got the gist of what you're talking about. Obviously, you're very much well on alert of what's going on here. Let's talk about, regardless of hurricane or not, we've got the king tide, and like Miami, Charleston is very susceptible to the king tide. It's one of the low areas. What kind of issues are you having with that right now, and how could Dorian coming by, not even making landfall, potentially impact Charleston with that going on?
Yeah, Jim, the timing is never right for a hurricane to come through, but when you're looking at a king tide, it just makes it tremendously worse. And, in the summer months, we had these serious rainstorms where, if they like king tide, we're underwater. And so, it's kind of a worse.
Look at others. Here's the American model. The GFS, again, has it going right through the Bahamas. That part we're pretty sure about, that westward track. But what we're not sure about is when does it make that turn to the north? And how close does it get to the Florida coastline? Now, according to the GFS, it's a little bit farther off, a little bit more off toward the northeast coast of Florida by Wednesday and into South Carolina. Yes, this one is also predicting a landfalling hurricane right there in South Carolina later on this week, and then still impacting the Outer Banks, by the way, on Thursday, the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So the steering factors that we look at, we've got that clockwise flow around this upper level high. That is what's steering it right now. We've got the trough also interacting with this thing. So for now, we are fairly certain it's going to continue westward, at least in the next couple of days, but it is going to slow down brutally. Unfortunately, we talked to the director at the National Hurricane Center. He was thinking it might even actually stall out a little bit as it's moving across those northernmost islands of the Bahamas. And then eventually, does that northern escape route open up, and when does it open up as it moves up the east coast of Florida? We do know that the intensity is going to maintain because we don't have much shear getting in the way, very little land interaction, plenty of moisture in place for Dorian to maintain itself as well. I mean, these sea surface temperatures, it's like bathwater out here. You've got mid to upper 80s right where Dorian is headed. Not quite as warm as through the Keys, but it's still warm enough to sustain a major hurricane. Tropical storm force winds, those probabilities are increasing now for the east coast of Florida. The hurricane force winds, still kind of tough to call because, it just depends on where the core of this hurricane makes its way. We're still not sure where the landfall is going to happen. So the hurricane probabilities are definitely high for the Bahamas, but not as high for the portions of eastern Florida. Reynolds.
Okay, Kelly, we're going to go bring a story to the Bahamas at this time. Captain Stephen Russell is the director of the National Emergency Management Agency in the Bahamas. He joins us now by phone at this time. My goodness, for the Commonwealth, when did you start preparing for Dorian?
Well, good morning. We normally start at least 4 or 5 days out. Once we are certain that once you view the projected track and it shows where it's going to come through or near the Bahamas, we start making our preparations at least 4 or 5 days out. That's what we start.
When it comes to the Bahamas and the Commonwealth, it's made up of more than 700 islands. You've got a population just shy of 400,000 people. What islands and areas concern you the most?
Well, of course, definitely the islands in the northwestern Bahamas, from New Providence, Abaco, Grand Bahama, and Eleuthera. Those are our population centers and our main center of commerce. So we're really concerned how those islands may be impacted by the approaching hurricane.
Goodness, do you have plans to actually expand the evacuation orders to other spots?
Yes, again, we're going to look at the alerts that are coming out at 11 a.m. this morning, and we may extend the alerts, other watches and warnings to the portions of the New Providence, Eleuthera, and all the islands, definitely in the northwest Bahamas. That's our intended plan as we go through today.
Any special concern for spots like Bimini, low-lying areas? Are those that are also places that you've got great concerns with?
Yes, most certainly. Definitely in the Abacos, the chain of keys in the North Abacos. We see where the hurricane is going to cross North Abaco and all across Grand Bahama. Definitely the keys in Abaco, we have made an appeal for persons to evacuate those keys in Abaco chain. We've asked persons in the western and eastern Grand Bahama, those low-lying flood-prone areas. We've made a strong appeal for them to leave those areas. Bimini, yes, we are mindful there's just a small island. Potential surge and hurricane force winds, we are making an appeal for persons likewise to evacuate the Bimini Island if they're not comfortable remaining in their properties.
Yes, sir. I know we're all in this together here in the States. People are trying to prepare the best they can. I know in the Bahamas they're doing the same thing. Any great concerns this morning about people not getting the supplies they desperately need?
Supplies are readily available in various sectors, but our main focus at this point in time as the storm approaches, saving lives, minimizing injuries, and minimizing damages, damages and losses. But the main focus is to get persons out of those low-lying areas. Again, Category 4 storm and winds 145 miles per hour this time. We can expect catastrophic damages to structures and structural failures. So we want persons to leave those low-lying areas that can be prone to the surge and get into the mainland or off the islands for safety first. And the things that are needed would come thereafter.
I see. Captain Stephen Russell, the Director of National Emergency Management Agency in the Bahamas. So much respect for you, your great country, wishing you the very, very best. Let's send it back over to Jim. And Jim, he's not mincing words. They're doing the best they can to prepare for the onslaught they expect within hours and certainly over the next several days.
Yeah, I mean, you heard what he, almost the troubling sound in his voice. He's very concerned, obviously, about the Bahamas. For whatever it's worth, guys, the Bahamas is still going to get, some of the worst of this storm. But I just looked at the latest HWRF run, which is a high-resolution model at the Hurricane Center. It's their big, statistical and dynamic model, and they have it a little bit north of the Bahamas. So keep your fingers crossed. Hey, I want to talk to Mark Perry here quickly. He's an oceanographer. Mark, we talked earlier about what happened back in 2004. That's pretty crazy. But even with that's talking about Matthew. With a storm offshore, we can still have big impacts here.
Right. Matthew came by and went up the coast just like it could do this one, but the storm surge pushing in on our coast just raised the levels up here about 5-6 feet. And then those kind of things, along with all the rain that it dropped, creates all that water in the estuary trying to get out the inlet and out to the ocean, and that's what raises up our tides too. So.
And what about some place like St. Augustine? Why are they so prone to water rise up there?
Well, they've got the coastal configuration up there is a little different.
It's kind of a little convergent area.
It's all convergent up there. Get out. And the same way here with this big estuary and coming in, and Lake Okeechobee connected to us too. They're worried about the lake rising and discharging that water.
I got about 30 seconds here because that interview went long. What kind of impacts can we expect here?
We can expect major storm surge. If we get winds, we'll have wind destruction, but watch out for that storm surge. We're at king tides. We're at 4 feet tides, normally 2.6 feet. watch out for that storm surge going to come, and if it's moving slow, it could last a long time, dropping a lot of rain.
Mark Perry, appreciate you, buddy.
You're welcome.
Oceanographer here, guys. You know, again, people underestimate the power of water. It's still going to come in, even if the storm stays offshore. It may not be as high, but still, we're going to get it.
Down despite shifts in the forecast. And Georgia Governor Brian Kemp declared a state of emergency in several coastal counties and is warning residents to remain vigilant and prepare now. And South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster has declared a state of emergency ahead of Dorian. The declaration allows state and local emergency agencies to start staging along the coast. All right, one of the impacts, of course, with any tropical entity would be the potential for massive flooding. So we take a look here at how much rain Dorian could dump here along Florida up into the Carolinas. And this is through next Thursday. And right now we're looking at 3 to 5 inches here right along the coastal areas up to the Outer Banks from about Miami or Palm Beach. This particular forecast keeps a lot of the very heaviest of rain offshore. Certainly, though, the Bahamas could be in big trouble with about 1 foot to 2 feet of rain coming in from Dorian. So the flooding is going to be an issue. The coastal erosion is likely going to be an issue. Just look at Florida and just how wet we have been. This is just since June 1st of this year. Miami, you are running about 13 inches above average for this time of year. Tampa almost 10, and Daytona Beach about 1/2 foot. So the ground's saturated. It's very wet out there. We're talking about low-lying areas, a lot of tropical moisture coming in. So we're talking about coastal flooding as well as possible inland flooding. It just depends on how much the storm speeds up or slows down, which is the worst case scenario once we do get a landfall. So the wave heights right now, we're looking at, in general, some of the highest being right around 10 feet there as the storm is still to the east of the Bahamas, but moving in that general direction due east here and will continue to do so. The forecast wave heights, we look at what we expect, and certainly some very big waves coming in and around Freeport, Bahamas, that area, maybe 20 feet or higher. So obviously a lot of adjustments being made there, I'm sure, in terms of the cruise ships. And then as we head up the coast, of course, this particular model showing some of the biggest waves out at sea, but still looking at some coastal impacts here in terms of the wave heights. And of course, the rip currents are also going to be extremely intense here. So this is not the time that you're going to want to be getting out in any of these waters here. The tide cycles, those also play a really big role in this. Here in West Palm Beach, we're looking at the worst timing here being Monday high tide, Tuesday high tide right around noon, and that is when the worst of it could be there right along the coastal areas. All right, we want to get back now to Vero Beach, Florida. Meteorologist Tevin Wooten is there. And Tevin, you know, we keep stressing that it's not time yet to let your guard down there in Florida. But do you think people are doing that already?
Oh, Julie, absolutely. I mean, going out today, everyone, of course, is still in those gas lines. They're still in Walmarts. I saw a business owner today boarding up a business as I went for a morning run. And the gist that everyone is sort of putting down here is that, yeah, we're still getting prepared. I mean, we're Floridians through and through, so we know what hurricanes can do. We know how they can perform, and we know that there is some sort of, or an element of uncertainty coming along with them. In fact, some of the city crews, they were out today and yesterday going to different intersections and taking down stoplights. Now, take a look at some of this video here, because this is sort of unique because they have hanging stoplights, not posted on the ground or on some sort of post. And so, because as the winds come through, as you can imagine with a hurricane, 40 to 50 miles an hour at the very least, that might cause those traffic lights to come down on the ground, which they certainly don't want. And so they're going through different intersections right now, taking some of them down, not all of them, still leaving up one per street or per intersection at the very least. Of course, this is a reminder, though, when the power lines do go down or power traffic signals do go out, treat that intersection like a four-way stop. Now, just as some of the city crews have been getting ready for Hurricane Dorian, there's also a bridal crew getting ready for a big day today. And let me tell you, Kalisha Jackson is not letting Dorian ruin her bridal party and her wedding. Take a listen.
The hope is sunshine, lots of love, family, laughter, and a happily ever after. So, I mean, hey, we were just hoping for today. Clear skies. After this, we're all ready. We got shutters up. We've got water. We're prepared. So we're ready for whatever comes our way.
In fact, good luck to have something like that happen. Thank you so much. And let's talk about what's going on with the satellite picture here, this is an incredibly dangerous storm, about as well-formed a storm as you are ever going to see on the satellite picture. Very well-defined eye here, and what's called the central dense overcast. You see the tremendous symmetry, the circularity there showing up in the satellite imagery, and also that stadium effect in the eye itself. And now not all that far away from the Bahamas. The one thing that has not changed in this forecast is this is going to be a devastating storm for the Bahamas, and we think that is going to begin tomorrow. This is the European model wind forecast, and that most dangerous ring of wind there, the eye wall, as we call it, beginning to move to perhaps the north side of Eleuthera Island, getting towards Great Abaco Island as well, and then Grand Bahama Island going into Monday. And at this point, the storm is really slowing down. So that is going to mean a prolonged period of wind and surge and tremendously heavy rain there in the northern part of the Bahamas. This is precisely what we were so worried about for South Florida. May not happen in South Florida, but certainly it's going to be a terrible storm across the northern part of the Bahamas here going into tomorrow and on into Monday as well. So there are hurricane warnings up in those islands I mentioned, including New Providence, and then hurricane watches to the south. Look at this storm surge of 10 to 15 feet there. You've got a very shallow shelf across those islands, so there's going to be terrific storm surge and, of course, battering waves as well. The onslaught is going to be terrible there, unfortunately, for our friends in the Bahamas. Now, here is the European model forecast. This is the European model run from overnight, and I do want to tell you that we got an intermediate run of the European model that goes out to 90 hours. It is actually showing a track that is a little farther to the west. So this is why I say we are very much not out of the woods as regards potential serious Florida impacts. And then beyond that, the model showing the storm coming up and into South and North Carolina. So you folks need to be on high alert at this point. We have a team of meteorologists spread out across the southeast coast covering every angle of this story as Hurricane Dorian approaches. You want to stay with the Weather Channel for continuing coverage of tracking Dorian throughout the night.
Bear presents A Job Well Done.
Winds. We'll see whether or not they decide to use that in the next advisory. Right now, it's officially a 150-mile-per-hour storm. But again, what they found as they pass through the center of the storm, right in there, you see that peak showing up right there. Those are winds of 161 miles per hour, estimated by what is called the SFMR. It's a device that scans the surface of the ocean, and oftentimes a very, very reliable device. So you're talking about an incredibly powerful, incredibly mean storm. There you see that well-defined eye and eye wall there, and the lightning actually showing up in the eye wall right now as it continues to bear down on the Bahamas. It's going to be moving in during the day tomorrow, first into the north side of Eleuthera as well as Great Abaco Islands, and then towards Grand Bahama going into Monday. There's the latest on the stats. The forward motion has decreased here, so this long advertised slowing down is now underway. It is moving to the west at 8 miles per hour, and that slowing is going to continue, and it's for that reason this is going to be a relentless, terrible, historic storm for the Bahamas. And by no means are serious impacts in Florida off the table at this point, though the guidance, the model guidance as we call it, has made a dramatic shift to the east here in the last 24 hours, and a lot of the ensemble guidance is now offshore. There's still plenty of it that is onshore, and we've even had a little bit of a trend farther west in some of the modeling just this morning. The European model, for example, the intermediate run of the European model, which comes out at 6Z, for those of you who are familiar with that, very early in the morning, that actually showed a track that was right along the coast and just edging into the coast. And so by no means are we out of the woods here in Florida. And then beyond that, very, very important to think about what is going to happen in the Carolinas, because we could very much be looking at a direct hit in the Carolinas. Now, this is the European model run from last night. And so you see it slowly coming through the Bahamas. And, you know, even if it is offshore, we are still going to see significant impacts along the coast in terms of surge and wave action and very strong winds, tropical storm force winds, and also very heavy rain, and just a little bit of a shift farther to the west can raise the stakes dramatically. It's not going to take very much of a shift to the west to change things really dramatically. It's then going to come up and along the coast and towards northern Florida. Then going into Wednesday, that's when we may see more of that core of the storm starting to interact with land if it hasn't done so already, and starting to really affect Georgia and South Carolina and coming up into North Carolina. So this could be very much like Matthew. I know Matthew is fresh in your minds. We had huge impacts from surge there, a lot of wind damage as well, and this could be a similar storm to Matthew. And then beyond that, continues up and may make landfall somewhere between South Carolina and also into North Carolina. So we really want you folks to be aware of this, to be on heightened alert at this point. We could be looking at a landfall in the Carolinas with this storm coming up in the middle of next week. All right, well, joining us live now from Vero Beach, Florida, is meteorologist Tevin Wooten. And Tevin, it's great to hear you say that people are not saying, okay, everything's fine now, because it certainly is not.
Right, Carl. I mean, we still have a powerful Category 4, perhaps a Category 5 hurricane not too close or not too far away from Florida's eastern coastline here. And even though if Florida does not take a direct hit from Hurricane Dorian, a lot of the businesses have already taken an economic impact. This was certainly supposed to be a huge Labor Day weekend. We're going to speak with one business owner here, Vero Tackle and Marina, about how they've taken an economic impact, but also other businesses nearby. They are still getting prepared for this hurricane as it barrels closer and closer through the Bahamas and eventually closer towards the U.S. mainland here. The Weather Channel complete coverage, comprehensive coverage you can only see here. We've got teams spread all across the southeast. We'll be right back.
And we don't know whether or not that's going to happen in this case. But if they do keep that, then they've got evidence to call this a Category 5 storm. And we're going to get a new advisory coming up here at 2 o'clock. So we very well could be looking at a Category 5 storm. There's that peak right in there. And that is over Category 5 intensity. This thing is incredibly well formed. You can see that on the satellite picture. You can see the very tight little eye there and eye wall. You also noticed in that Hurricane Hunter data that the winds drop off pretty dramatically. So we're not looking at a tremendous amount of very strong wind outside of that area of very strongest winds there right around the eye wall. And the storm is now making its way towards the Bahamas. It's going to be coming in, but also slowing down as it starts to move in tomorrow. So it's going to take from tomorrow through the day on Monday and then finally into Tuesday before it starts to move out there in the northern part of the Bahamas, Eleuthera Island, Great Abaco, Grand Bahama, and New Providence to some extent as well. So we're going to be talking about a relentless pounding of wind and storm surge and rain. This is going to be an historic storm for the northern part of the Bahamas, and our hearts going out to the people of the Bahamas for that reason. And here you see the forecast track from the Hurricane Center in red right in there, which is now offshore, but notice that many of the European models, the ensemble members, are still showing a track that is closer to the coast, that is still very much on the table at this point. Well, we want to hear from you. Send us your questions. Just tweet us or post your questions on our Facebook page. You can use the hashtag Hurricane, and they may have discarded, could be looking at a Category 5 as it continues to slowly move to the west. Now moving to the west at 8 miles per hour, a pressure of 945, and you can see how well formed it is on the visible satellite. Very well defined eye, and actually a fairly small, what we call radius of maximum wind. That's the strongest wind that is right around that eye. Only about half the size of the average hurricane, so a relatively compact area of strongest winds right now, but that can change if we see what is called an eye wall replacement cycle. Sometimes that inner eye wall will begin to break down, and then an outer eye wall forms, which is larger, and that often expands the wind field considerably. So the storm is now about 200 miles from Great Abaco Island. That island right there, slowly going to be moving in during the day tomorrow, and then it's going to be slowing at the same time. So it is going to be pounding those islands, Great Abaco and Eleuthera initially, and then New Providence and also Grand Bahama from Sunday into Monday. 100+ mile per hour winds for an extended period of time, and storm surge of 10 to 15 feet in that relatively shallow shelf there. This is going to be a devastating blow for the northern part of the Bahamas, and our hearts going out to those folks. And certainly it's going to be a really tough next 24 to 48 hours there. This is the forecast track and intensities from the Hurricane Center. And no doubt you've heard already that there's been a really marked shift in the model guidance in the last 24 hours, moving more of that guidance off to the east. So many of the model members, the ensemble members, have now moved out and over the open water. So it is a possibility that the storm moves out, curves around, and stays out over the open water. But it's also possible that it rides right along the coast. It's also possible that it rides over the coast as well. By no means is a Florida landfall off the table at this point. That's the most important thing for you to know. Even though the risk has lessened for Florida, by no means has it been removed at this point. The risk is also very high for Georgia, and we could be looking at a landfall in parts of South Carolina or in North Carolina. The storm may have more opportunity just because of the nature of the coastline there, the way that the Carolinas stick out. We may see more opportunity for direct impacts in parts of South Carolina and North Carolina. So you folks along the coast there need to be thinking about what you need to do right now should this storm be moving in. And that would be going into Wednesday and Thursday of this upcoming week. Julie, over to you.
All right, Carl, this afternoon we're answering your questions about Dorian and all things hurricane in general. We've received a lot of responses from Twitter and Facebook. So we do want to dive in right now and answer those questions, at least some of them for you. At Med Pipeline asks, what are the chances for a stall like Florence or Harvey leading to major inland flooding for South Carolina or North Carolina?
Well, so most of the modeling is indicating that as the storm gets up into the Carolinas, it is going to be moving. At that point, doesn't look like it's going to be stalling. It's, it's already going to be moving very slow to begin with.
Right.
So it's probably going to accelerate, and you can see that sort of in the track guidance here. So, it doesn't look like a Florence where it's going to be just sitting over the same areas.
Raining for days.
Yes, it does not look like that. But still, because it will start out as a slower moving storm, we could be talking about significant rain and flash flooding.
Okay. Well, Vicky Hand asks, when will Florida's East Coast start feeling the rain bands of Dorian and the winds?
Well, a lot of that depends on the exact track of the storm. And the thing that's been vexing us all along has been, where exactly does that turn occur? So if, for example, the turn were to occur a little bit more quickly, they might just start to edge in going into Tuesday. The way that this model depicts it, this is the European model from last night, shows that maybe Monday night and then certainly into Tuesday and into Wednesday, we start to get those bands coming more on shore there.
All right, and one more from Patricia Klein. She asks, how is the pressure related to the strength of a hurricane?
So the hurricane is a big heat engine, and the model is that warm and humid air comes into the base of the storm, rises up through these very tall thunderstorms in the middle, and then goes out at the top. So it's an in, up, and out model. And the stronger the storm becomes, the taller those thunderstorms grow, the more the vertical motion increases, which lowers the pressure and also brings in stronger wind. And a representation of that are these lines of equal pressure. So when you've got a lot of these lines here, that means you've got a very strong flow going into the center of the hurricane and then up and out. And that is a direct relationship. The lower the pressure, the stronger the wind.
Okay, all good questions. Keep those coming. And right now we want to get it back outside to Tevin. He is in Vero Beach, Florida.
Well, Julie, still coming along with Hurricane Dorian. We have to be concerned about the rainfall. We could be seeing between 8 and 10 inches of rain in a short amount of time. Take a look at this. This is the Indian River here. It's come up certainly over the past few days, but also during Hurricane Matthew. Now, if you think about the water, 8 to 10 inches of rainwater pushing up. The Riverside Cafe, they are right on the river, plus the onshore push of winds. There could certainly be a lot of water and a lot of wind coming along. We're going to speak to the owner, and they've tried a new technique here on how to board up their windows. We'll be right back.
Sometimes. We have a team of meteorologists out there covering Dorian as people prepare for the worst. Meteorologist Felicia Combs is near Orlando. And we begin with meteorologist Tevin Wooten. He's live in Vero Beach, Florida. Tevin.
Yeah, good afternoon to you, Julie. We do want to get you the latest information, the track and the cone of Hurricane Dorian. Of course, let's pull that up right now to show you the latest information if you're still preparing. The good news is you do still have time, and that's sort of the best news to give you right now. Of course, there's also that slight jog towards the east that we've been looking at, or at least in the predicted path of Hurricane Dorian. Now, I say all that to say you should still prepare. A powerful Category 4 hurricane winds at 150 miles per hour. If someone told you that was headed your way, but it might hit or it might not, you would certainly want to prepare, and you still should prepare. The latest cone, though, showing you that track towards the north and east, eventually perhaps into the coastal Carolina area and also coastal Georgia as well. So Wilmington Beach, Wrightsville Beach, heads up to you, also heads up in Savannah and Tybee Island as well. Here in Vero Beach, Florida, we are still preparing to. Some of the businesses eventually boarding up. Some of them have already boarded up. Some of them also have sandbags. We are at Riverside Cafe speaking with Ellen Lane and Brandon Howard, the owner and the chef here, lead chef here at Riverside Cafe, a fantastic restaurant. It's college football Saturday, but it's also Saturday to prepare for Hurricane Dorian, and you guys have actually been working all day yesterday too to sort of secure some of the TVs and also some of the windows as well.
Yep, then we have sandbags ready, which is a new thing we're doing this year. We haven't done that yet, but we've been through a lot of hurricanes and we always survive.
We do, and we're one of the last ones on the beach to stay open. And we do that not just for our community and our local people, but also the people that work on the lines and, doing work in the community, the officers, the cable guys, all that stuff. So we try to stay open for them as well. And also people want to have some fun. Come here and have a drink, and, finish up your last preparations and come to Riverside, have a fun time. But we'll be here, we'll be open as soon as possible, too.
Yes.
Going to stay open late as soon as you can and open up early as soon as you can as well.
The only reason we're going to shut down, they close the bridges.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other than that, then we're going to be here. We're usually the last people to close on the island, and we'll hopefully be one of the first ones to open up.
Yep.
Ellen, take me through, you were saying earlier that, a lot of people, they've already boarded up their home,
Yes.
they've cleaned out their refrigerators, so they don't really have any food left to use.
And they love coming here because we're still open and we have drinks and food and we have a limited menu, but we still are ready.
And so during Matthew, you guys actually saw quite a bit of water come up close to your business
it
here.
comes all the way through. So this year, like I said, we're trying sandbags. We haven't tried that yet.
You haven't tried sandbags
Nope.
yet. And then we showed before the break, we showed one thing where you guys are trying boards instead of boarding up. You put 2x4s on top of the windows.
Well, we usually take the windows out because we just let it blow through. We take everything in here and we let it blow through out there. But this year we're leaving the windows in and we're boarding them up. So.
And that's what our engineer had suggested. One of the reasons we take everything down is because the fans we have in there and all the TVs, it's a real pain in the neck to take all that out of there. So our engineer suggested that we try this technique, and well, hopefully it'll work.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we don't need it.
Hopefully you don't need it. Brandon, Ellen, thank you so much. Carl, back into you.
All right, Devin, thank you very much. And let's talk about the new advisory from the National Hurricane Center. And we are still looking at an incredibly dangerous storm, a 150-mile-per-hour Category 4 hurricane, just shy of being a Category 5 storm, now moving to the west at 8 miles per hour. And it's going to continue to slow down, we think, over the next day or so. Now about 200 miles to the east of Great Abaco in the northern part of the Bahamas. Now, I want to show you some infrared satellite imagery, and look at that picture. Just take that in for a moment. You are looking at a picture of a monster right there. There is incredible power in that storm, and that's why we've been so worried about where this storm is going to go. You see the incredibly well-formed eye there and what is called the central dense overcast, very cold cloud tops, very tall thunderstorms in a large circle around that eye. And there's really no reason to believe that it won't continue to be an incredibly powerful storm as it comes closer to the Bahamas. So this is Eleuthera Island. This is Great Abaco right here, and then Grand Bahama and New Providence, where you've got Nassau. All of those islands under hurricane warnings. The storm is going to begin to move in, we think, during the day tomorrow, and then slowly come across the northern Bahamas over the course of a couple of days. So it is going to be a relentless pounding of 100+ mile-per-hour winds, along with surge of 10 to 15 feet. This is going to be one for the books in the northern part of the Bahamas, and our hearts going out to the people of the Bahamas as this storm comes in. Now, here's the latest forecast track and intensities from the Hurricane Center. And you notice here that it is offshore to a large extent, and that's because there's been a big trend in the model guidance moving more offshore. But by no means By no means does that take Florida impacts off the table at this point. It's still entirely possible that we see not only significant impacts in Florida, we could even see a landfall in Florida. That is not set in stone that the storm is going to be offshore. And then beyond that, significant impacts in Georgia are possible, and we could be looking at a landfall in South Carolina or North Carolina. So all along the southeast Atlantic coast, people need to be on their guard for the possibility of very serious impacts from this storm in the coming days. Julie, over to you.
Can't stress that enough. Do not let your guard down just yet. We do have new video into the Weather Channel. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis touring the National Hurricane Center in Miami. DeSantis has been crisscrossing the state in past days, warning residents about Hurricane Dorian's powerful potential. Governor DeSantis has activated more than 2,000 National Guard troops for storm response, and another 1,500 are on standby. All right, one of the impacts with any tropical system, of course, the rain that comes along with them and the flood potential as well. So here's our latest on that. We do have some of the heavier rains currently going to be located here over the Bahamas, where it could really be devastating. Maybe a foot to 2 feet of rain or more coming in, particularly to the northwestern Bahamas, along with the surge and the wind. This is not going to be a good situation at all for the Bahamas. Showing some lower totals, still enough to cause some flooding, though, here along the coastal areas of Florida up into the Carolinas and Georgia. So anywhere from, say, 3 to 5 inches. And this would be through next week, so through next Thursday. Already very wet in Florida there and don't need much to cause flooding and additional rainfall, that is. Miami already up over a foot in terms of our departures. Just
as we continue to monitor Hurricane Dorian, we have raised concerns about construction cranes in our county. The state of Florida and Governor Ron DeSantis have heard us. The state has temporarily suspended preemption of hurricane preparation provisions for tower cranes and hoisting equipment. A problem really pretty unique to Miami-Dade County because of all the high-rise cranes that we have here.
All right, that was the mayor there just talking about one of the issues in South Florida. We take a look, though, at the very latest on Dorian right now. Dorian continues to strengthen. It is currently at a Category 4 status, 150-mile-per-hour winds, but it's nearing that Cat 5 status. Hurricane warning is up for the northern Bahamas, and watches may be issued for some parts of the east coast of Florida later on today. So right now, 150-mile-per-hour storm at 157. We would have a Category 5. Pressure's at 945 millibars. It's moving to the west right now at 8 miles per hour. Still a couple hundred miles to the east of the Great Abaco, Bahamas. So we're looking at the storm, unfortunately, its path moving westward right into the Bahamas. And it does look like by tomorrow, starting to see some of those impacts in the Bahamas, and on Monday, certainly as well. Still as at least perhaps a Category 4 storm, if not stronger. So very strong winds going to be impacting the Bahamas, as well as a lot of storm surge. So it is unfortunately not a good situation, particularly for the northern Bahamas. And then where it goes, well, the latest track from the National Hurricane Center has shifted it a little bit farther here now to the east. However, still expecting impacts along the Florida coast up into the Carolinas and Georgia. And at this point, it is still too early to rule out a change here, so we could actually still see those impacts very much in play in Florida and also in Georgia and the Carolinas. And in fact, we still have on Thursday a 110-mile-per-hour storm forecast as it crosses over the border from South Carolina into North Carolina. So again, this is going to be a long-duration event. First stop will be the Bahamas, though. We have that hurricane watch up for the southern Bahamas. The warning here for the northern Bahamas, Freeport right in the crosshairs here, and expecting to see the arrival of those tropical storm force winds starting tomorrow. So tomorrow morning into tomorrow evening, starting to feel those winds coming into the Bahamas, and then by Monday we start to feel them in South Florida. So really going to be another very tense couple of days here. I think right now, certainly we are feeling for the Bahamas, because it does look, Carl, like we are going to be seeing some major impacts from Dorian arriving in the Bahamas. I mean, we're talking about a powerful, almost a Category 5 storm at this point.
Yeah, you know, I'm looking at this satellite imagery right now, and I just have this tremendous sense of dread looking at how intense this storm is, the presentation on satellite imagery. This is an atmospheric disturbance that you just do not see very often, an extreme atmospheric disturbance here. Look at the presentation there, incredibly symmetrical, very, very well-defined eye, and you've got a very well-defined what is called a CDO. That is the central dense overcast. It's those tall thunderstorms that are around the eye there. And notice the coloring as well. There's a little bit of a mixture of that sort of darkest color and the red early on in the loop there. And now, most recently, we're seeing more of that darker color, indicating we're seeing colder cloud tops, even taller thunderstorms all around that central dense overcast there, all around the periphery of that eye. This is an incredibly well-formed storm. And as Julie mentioned, our hearts going out to the people of the Bahamas. Great Abaco Island is right here, and it's about 200 miles now to the west of the storm. It's going to start moving into Great Abaco, we think, tomorrow afternoon. And then, as it's doing that, it's going to be dramatically slowing down. So we're going to be talking about a prolonged period of winds well over 100 miles per hour, storm surge of 10 to 15 feet in those relatively low-lying islands. That's also going to affect the northern part of Eleuthera, perhaps New Providence Island here, and then eventually Grand Bahama Island as well as it slowly comes across. This is going to be a terrible, devastating, historic storm for the northern part of the Bahamas, unfortunately. Now, when we look at the turn here and the possibility of tropical storm force winds, of course, this has a lot to do with the exact track of the storm. So if it tracks a little farther to the west, you can move all of those probabilities over a little bit, and the tropical storm force winds are going to extend farther inland. But all along, as it's moving up the coast, it's going to be driving wind into the coast and piling up water and piling up waves as well. And so this is going to have a significant impact on the coast. If it's even offshore by 50 or 100 miles, we're still going to be talking about a significant impact. And we want to go out now to Tevin Wooten. He's in Vero Beach. And Tevin, you know, we really want to impress people about the idea of this storm not being offshore and not a threat. Even if it is offshore, we still could be looking at a very serious threat.
And Carl, that's a very good point. I was just speaking with one homeowner. He lives beyond this river here on the other side. That's the downtown side of Vero Beach, Florida. He was concerned because during Matthew and likely during this event as well, he said it only takes about 2 feet for that water to rise, and then the water gets in their home just beyond the canal. So that's a concern, rising water, not just from the rainwater, but also from that onshore push as Dorian moves towards the north eventually. But also for some homeowners, they live in the 7th floor of a condo building. Imagine how strong the winds can get up there, or even stronger too. We'll explain how she is evacuating and why in just a few moments. Stick around, continuing coverage of Tropical Storm Dorian on the other side of this break.
Last time I bought a used car.
Right now.
Carl, they got to pay attention because this isn't over yet. I mean, we're not dealing with, you know, just a little storm. I mean, this is a 150-mile-an-hour hurricane. Look at this. I mean, that's about as good as you can get in the Atlantic. So look at this forecast. There's a couple scenarios. So if we slow down and we turn a little early, okay, yes, we could be on the track with our forecast, maybe a little bit to the right, but a little wobble, a little change, a small change where you start slowing down a little bit later. Right now we have it over the Bahamas, and just a devastating situation for the Bahamas. If it does that, look, now all of a sudden we change the track and it gets really close to the Florida coast. So we got to pay attention. We're not really out of this yet. Anybody in Florida, just watch this really close.
And Ken, what about beyond that? What can we tell the residents of Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina?
You have to really watch this forecast because there is some time. So, you know, talking to, you know, the Carolinas and Georgia, this is 8 a.m. on Wednesday. This is Thursday. So we've got a long way to go to deal with this hurricane. So after we slow down and turn towards the north, we expect some acceleration. But at the same time, depends on how close to the coast. Either way, you're still going to get some of these impacts from the storm surge, that onshore flow that's so prolonged and strong, you could push that water in. So still dangers from the rain, dangers from the wind, and dangers from that storm surge.
And can you tell us what you're thinking about in terms of watches for the U.S. coast at this point?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've been talking about it all day, really trying to line up the arrival. Remember, this is such a slower forecast than before, so that slow movement, trying to time it out 48 hours. So this afternoon, we've been working real hard. I've literally seen protractors and rulers and really trying to measure it out. We're getting really close to that, especially in areas, you start looking at along the track and maybe to the left. You start impacting portions of Florida here with those winds, the tropical storm force winds. So we're really looking at it close. A lot of conversations about it this afternoon.
All right, Ken Graham, Director of the National Hurricane Center, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate your work. And we want to hear from you. You can send us your questions. Just tweet us or post your questions on our Facebook page. Use the hashtag Hurricane Questions, and we'll answer more throughout the day right here on the Weather Channel. Here's a look at the forecast track and intensities from the Hurricane Center, and we are very much looking at the possibility of serious impacts in Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas. Much more on all of this coming up.
COPD
off Carolinas, and just a terrible, terrible situation for the northern part of the Bahamas. Right now, we're looking at a strong Category 4 storm, 150-mile-per-hour wind, moving to the west at 8 miles per hour, but it's expected to slow down. I'm going to show you that here in the model, and take a look at the presentation on satellite. I mean, that is about as mean of a tropical cyclone as you are ever going to see. Just an incredibly well-formed eye and what we call central dense overcast, those very tall thunderstorms around the eye. You see the dark colors there that are wrapping around the south side and starting to wrap around the east side in the most recent frame. So it looks like it's continuing to intensify from a satellite perspective. Plane's going to be going out there about 4 o'clock or so, and we'll get a good idea of what's going on with the storm. But we could very well be looking at a storm that is on its way to becoming a Category 5 storm. Now, here's a look at the Bahamas. There's Eleuthera Island right there. This is Great Abaco. This is the island that's going to be hit very, very hard, along with Grand Bahama Island and then New Providence as well. And I want to show you this new run of the European model because it is very, very troubling for the Bahamas. You'll notice that the center of circulation gets towards Great Abaco. That's during the day tomorrow. And then, as I mentioned, it is really, really slowing down. So going from Sunday into Monday, a full 24 hours, the storm, at least in this model depiction, has barely moved in that time. It slows down dramatically, perhaps to a stall, so still over Great Abaco Island, and then getting over Grand Bahama Island very slowly. Those islands in particular could be absolutely devastated. This could be a catastrophe, one of the worst storms we've seen in the northern part of the Bahamas because it is such a powerful storm and because it's just not going to move. And this is what had us so worried about what might happen in Florida. And it appears that that is going to be happening in the northern Bahamas, and our hearts going out to the people of the Bahamas. Julie, over to you.
Not a good situation. All right, Carl. Well, this afternoon, we are answering your questions about Hurricane Dorian and hurricanes in general. We've received a lot of responses from Twitter and Facebook, so we want to dive in right now. We begin here with Steph, 1988. She asks, what type of hurricane is worse, a fast-moving storm or a slow-moving storm?
Well, I'd say generally a slower moving storm is worse. A very fast moving storm can be bad because you can add the forward speed to the wind there. So you have some, storms that come up along the northeast coast, maybe moving at 50 miles per hour, and it adds that to the wind speed on the right side of the circulation there. But a slow moving storm is one that can just prolong the impacts forever and ever, which is precisely what is going to happen in the Bahamas. And it's got us so worried.
Not to mention the rainfall and the flooding with a slow moving storm as well.
Yes.
All right, next question. Charlie asks, what is going on below the surface of a hurricane? How deep does the disturbance go in the water?
Well, one thing that we know about what happens with the ocean is when you've got a very strong hurricane, it churns up the ocean water. And oftentimes you've got warmer water at the surface, but the water is cooler below. And that cooler water from below is being brought up. That's called upwelling. That can actually weaken the circulation unless you've got very warm water that extends down to some depth, which is precisely what we're seeing here right over those northern islands in the Bahamas. So even as the storm is stalling and would normally be upwelling cooler water, it may actually not weaken very much because there's going to be so much warm water available for the system.
Part of the fuel
Yes.
All right. We have a team of meteorologists spread out across the southeast coast covering every angle of this story as Dorian approaches. Stay with the Weather Channel for continuing live coverage, tracking Dorian throughout the night, all right here, 24 hours on the Weather Channel.
Frisky's world. Whoa.
It's a tiny little shower speck on the radar. There's a few more specks out there. That's that scattered activity that we can expect to continue to go throughout the day today. This is not from Dorian whatsoever, not the far-reaching outer bands at all. But let's talk about preps for Dorian because people have been doing that here, not just today, but also yesterday. Throughout the city, several businesses boarding up, some of the city utility workers. They were also taking down some of the street lights and traffic lights such that when the high winds come through with Dorian, if they come through, the traffic lights, they won't necessarily fall to the ground and shatter. They'll be in storage away from danger. But also, one local pastor is trying to spread a message of love, of consideration, of not just the angst that people are sort of going through with the chaos and the confusion of Dorian. Take a listen to what he wants other people to know.
We called every member of the congregation here on the Treasure Coast who we know is widowed or alone or has oxygen. We called about 40 households. I have a hurricane preparedness team at the church, and we called every one of them. We also linked up people who have safe, strong houses and with spare bedrooms with the people on the island or elderly who are alone. So they're all ensconced in people's homes that are safe and clean and fancy, and we're just really pleased we took care of the entire 400-member congregation that way.
That was Reverend Scott Alexander. He's a local pastor. He also said that, you know, of course, when people are confused, when the tempers are high and they're flaring because they don't necessarily know what is to come, he does want to remind everyone to be considerate of one another and use this time to not necessarily spread hate, but spread a message of love. That's the latest here in Vero Beach. I'm going to go get my rain jacket, but let's slide up towards Orlando, just about 2 hours north and west with our Felicia Combs.
Hey, we're live here in Orlando. We've been at one of the service plazas all morning, and I'll tell you the general feel of most people here, they're relieved that they're finding gas pretty easily without a lot of hectic activity going on, and they're taking this very seriously. One thing in particular at this particular service station, you're not seeing any of those bags covering the handles, and that has been good news for the people who have been having a hard time finding gas as we are running short or running a bit low at some of the gas stations in the Orlando area. And in fact, across Florida, this particular station just perfect for people filling up, and that's partly because it's along the evacuation route. Now, I mentioned they have plenty of gas. They also have the extra long hoses that can reach to either side, and I've heard from some people that that's also helping to cut back on the congestion because you're not having everyone narrowed down to just one particular area that they're going in. Now, most of the people that we talked to are evacuating so far this morning from South Florida or from the East Coast, and one woman we spoke with said she'd rather be safe than sorry.
I've lived in Florida the majority of my life. I'm a Hurricane Andrew survivor. So, I mean, we've dealt with storms in the past, and it's better to be wrong in evacuating than wrong in staying in position.
Yeah, so that's generally what we are saying. Just keep that eye on Dorian. People here in Central Florida are saying they're feeling prepared and just waiting to see exactly what this storm does. Back to you, Carl.
All right, Felicia, thank you so much. And let's talk a little bit about the upper air pattern and what is going to be driving this storm over the next couple of days. We've been following this big flat ridge of high pressure seen right in here and the big clockwise flow around that. That's what's been driving the storm to the west. But what's going to happen is that high pressure is going to change. The character of that high is going to change. We go through time here going into Monday and then into Tuesday, and you see the high is more centered well offshore. And so that allows this weakness for the system to begin to turn to the north. And that's what the models were having a hard time resolving, where exactly that weakness would occur. And more we're seeing evidence that it may be just a little offshore, but by no means does that take Florida impacts off the table, and certainly does not take Carolina impacts off the table. We could be looking at a landfall there in South Carolina or North Carolina Wednesday and into Thursday as it continues to follow that weakness. And then eventually the storm is going to be drawn into these stronger upper level winds and taken up perhaps towards the mid-Atlantic region, perhaps across the Outer Banks, maybe affecting parts of southeast Virginia. But at that point, it looks like it is most likely going to begin to move offshore. So at least now it appears that we are not going to see direct impacts in the Northeast, more indirect impacts in the form of very large waves, a rip current threat, and some beach erosion. That's how it appears right now. But of course, that could change, and we'll have to continue to follow it closely. So here's the latest track from the National Hurricane Center, and you see how large that area of tropical storm force winds is. And so even if the storm is offshore, we may be looking at tropical storm force winds on the coast, a water level rise, a lot of wave action, beach erosion, certainly a very serious rip current threat. Even if the storm is offshore, it could bring serious impacts because the storm is such a powerful storm. That's the important part to consider in this case. This is not your ordinary hurricane. It is quite something else, being nearly a Category 5 storm and perhaps on its way to becoming a Category 5 hurricane. These are the tropical storm force wind probabilities, and you see they are fairly high, up to about 70 to 80% along the east coast of Florida as it stands right now. We'll see if the guidance continues to shift to the east, and maybe that will change, but as it stands right now, this is what we've got from the National Hurricane Center, so you need to be prepared for the possibility of tropical storm force winds. Hurricane force wind probabilities are lower along the Florida coast, in the order of about 20 to 30 to 40%, but certainly keep in mind that we could be looking at a landfall up into South and North Carolina. We've got a team of meteorologists spread out across the southeast coast covering every angle of this story as Hurricane Dorian approaches. You want to stay with the Weather Channel for continuing live coverage of tracking Dorian throughout the night.
You can't fake the goodness.
Days. This is a look at the surge forecast in the Bahamas. 10 to 15 feet of surge is what we are looking for there across the northern part from Grand Bahama Island there to Great Abaco, Eleuthera, down into New Providence Island as well. Also want to show you what's going on here with the European Model Ensemble members. As of last night, the afternoon run of the operational has come in, and we'll have those ensemble members before too long here. So you notice that what all of them are showing is that this westward journey continues, perhaps right across the Bahamas, very, very slowly, and then at some point, the storm starts to feel a weakness on the west side of the big high that's now driving it, and it starts to turn more to the north, and it lifts up. And so the big question is, where is that point? Is that point going to be after it has been sitting over the Bahamas for a day and a half? Is it going to be as it gets closer to the U.S. coast? Could it possibly be before it gets to the Bahamas? If you look at some of these members, you could say, well, yes, it's possible that it could make that turn before that happens. We can only hope that that happens because this storm is about as mean as you are ever going to see in terms of tropical cyclones. That is incredibly well formed there. You can see how well defined the eye is, and then also this area of cloud that is around the eye that is called the central dense overcast. And notice the coloring there. You see a lot of that deep coloring, that dark, almost black coloring there. That is showing you the very cold cloud tops, and that's indicating an incredibly well-formed storm. And, you know, once you've got that much power in the atmosphere, it just does not ramp down quickly. So this is, you know, about as dangerous as storms get. I would not be at all surprised if we see that it has become a Category 5 later today. And now probably just under 200 miles away from Marsh Harbor and Grand Abaco Island. And again, the European model indicating that the storm is going to begin to move in, most likely into the middle of the day tomorrow into Grand Abaco Island. But at that point, it really slows down and only very slowly moves across those islands. This is going to be most likely catastrophic for parts of the Bahamas. Well, joining us live now is meteorologist Tevin Wooten. He's in Vero Beach, Florida. And Tevin, more, slightly encouraging news with the latest run of the European model. We can hope that that trend continues at this point, but we still don't want to say that it's absolutely sure that the storm is going to be offshore.
Right, Carl, encouraging for sure for those perhaps along the east coast of Florida and in South Florida as well. For some others, though, that could be bad news, perhaps along the coastal Carolina area and in the coastal plains of Georgia, too. So we still have to monitor Dorian very closely. And still here in Vero Beach, if we get a lot of rainfall through here in the next couple of days and with an onshore push of winds, that will still be a little bit present for us here in Vero Beach. This could perhaps be bad news for the Indian River. A lot of residents are concerned, especially those in the Riverside area, that perhaps the water could rise and that would lead to flooding in their homes and their businesses. We're talking to some of those businesses coming up. You're watching the Weather Channel. Stick around.
That may not happen in this case, but certainly farther north, more towards South Carolina and North Carolina, a lot of the modeling indicating that we could be looking at a landfall or a near landfall in those areas.
Okay. And Casey asks, is there a chance Dorian stays offshore around the Carolinas and comes all the way up to New England?
Well, you know, there is some chance that the storm will stay offshore relative to the Carolinas. But if it does that, it looks like that beyond that, it would probably also be offshore as you get up to New England, because it's going to generally be moving out to the northeast. So if it does make landfall in the Carolinas, then there's some chance that it might get a little bit closer to the coast near New England. But if it's well offshore here, it's probably more likely going to be well offshore to the north as well.
Yeah, and I would think by then it would be weaker as well.
Yeah, well, probably, although it's, you know, it's also going to be transitioning. It's still pretty strong because it's been so strong.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we want to keep those questions coming. We have a team of meteorologists also spread out across the southeast coast, covering every angle of this story as Hurricane Dorian approaches. Stay with the Weather Channel for continuing live coverage of tracking Dorian throughout the night.
Skywall starting to affect Great Abaco Island tomorrow afternoon, and then 24 hours later, it is just beginning to move to the other side of the island. So you're talking about an exceptionally long duration of very, very strong wind. This is likely going to be catastrophic for those islands. Beyond that, the latest run of the European model does keep the core of the storm to the east of the Florida Peninsula, but then beyond that does also take it up into South and North Carolina. So that's what we need to watch next. And we want to hear from you. You can send us your questions. Just tweet us or post your questions on our Facebook page. Hashtag is Hurricane Questions.
All right, welcome back into the Weather Channel. Now we're continuing coverage of Hurricane Dorian. I'm meteorologist Tevin, live for you from Vero Beach, Florida, and we are at the Riverside Cafe right along the Indian River. And let me tell you, a lot of families have been out enjoying some college football today and some good food, and they've been doing that because they have already started preparing for Dorian. So now they can relax, they can take a nice break. And one of those families, actually the Swinger family over here, Charles, Chloe, and Jameson. And Charles, you were saying that you guys are actually from Pennsylvania, and this is your first hurricane.
Yep, so far. Well, hopefully it's not a hurricane at all, but
yeah,
you know, it looks like it is heading that way, so, you know, I guess so.
Hopefully it doesn't come any closer than it already is, right?
Yeah, I mean, my hopes coming down, I always thought we would go, you know, a couple of tropical storms first, and, you know, then a couple of days ago, they're saying Category 4, Category 5, and suddenly that's when you realize, like, it can get really fast, you know, and so we've just been doing our best to prepare and, you know, hunker down. And, I mean, we moved down here knowing it could happen. So, you know, we're just trying to do our best to get through it right now and keep it as enjoyable as possible.
And you guys have already, you started preparing, you're sort of taking a break because it's hot outside. So you don't want to do this in the extreme heat.
Yeah, I mean, like I was up late, probably 1 o'clock in the morning last night, you know, drilling the concrete and putting anchors in and putting up the shutters. And then, you know, today it was a little bit warmer, and, you know, we were just kind of sitting around the house, moving stuff around, you know, checking everything. And then I decided to take the kids out for a little bit and, you know, have a good time and just try to relax and just ease the tension of everything that's been going on the last couple of days for them.
All right, perfect. Charles, thank you so much. We appreciate you for your time, and the kids, too, enjoying a nice day today. Let's get you inside to Carl Parker, though. He's got the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center. Carl.
Yeah, that's right. Brand new advisory and still looking at a Category 4 storm at 150 miles per hour. It's not a surprise. There's actually not been any reconnaissance here in the last few hours, so there's no data to raise the intensity. Certainly the satellite presentation gives us indication that we may be looking at a stronger storm. We may be looking at a Category 5 at this time, but we just don't have the data to support that right now. Now, let's take a look at the new forecast track and intensities from the Hurricane Center. Not a lot of change here. It looks pretty similar to the forecast track that we were looking at before, talking about a Category 4 storm coming across the Bahamas very, very slowly, starting to move into Great Abaco Island through the middle of the day tomorrow, and then into Grand Bahama through the day on Monday, and then slowly then beginning to turn off to the north and more to the northeast, and could very well have direct impacts in parts of the Carolinas. But it's also possible that it remains offshore relative to the entire southeast Atlantic coast. And fingers crossed, let's hope that that is the case. But we just want you to be aware, particularly because of the way that North Carolina and South Carolina jut out into the ocean. There is potential for more direct impacts there in the Carolinas, and that would be coming into Wednesday and also into Thursday. So again, brand new advisory, and we've got no change here basically to the status of the storm. Still a Category 4 with 150 miles per hour. The hurricane hunters are en route right now. We're going to see what they find. It's going to be very interesting to see what they find, because we are looking at a storm that from a satellite perspective does appear to be a Category 5 storm at this time. I mean, that is what we call the classic sort of buzzsaw appearance there, where you've got this really well-developed eye, very well-developed central dense overcast with cold cloud tops. You can see some of the whitish colors that are showing up there in the darker color. Those are temperatures of -80, so exceptionally tall clouds. That is a very scary, very rare satellite appearance there, and not very far away. Now, the storm is expected to continue to move to the west and towards Great Abaco Island, now not all that far away, so it starts to move in tomorrow, but as it is doing so, it's going to be slowing down. This is most likely going to be catastrophic for parts of the Bahamas, and our hearts going out to the people of the Bahamas there, Great Abaco Island as well as Grand Bahama Island, and to some extent to Eleuthera and New Providence. It's going to be just a devastating storm for those folks. This is precisely what we were worried about in Florida, that the storm would make it towards the coast there and also begin to just slowly move off to the north. All right, let's take a look at the watches that are up now. And now tropical storm watches have been posted for parts of South Florida. So this shows us that we are not out of the woods as regards the potential for some impacts here in South Florida. Tropical storm watches up anywhere from Palm Beach County, including West Palm Beach, and then on into Indian River County, and then on into St. Lucie County as well, and then on up towards Vero Beach, and then areas offshore, as the storm is again going to be very close to those areas. Now, I want to show you the model forecast. This is the European model forecast that we got in this afternoon, and what it's showing us is this very slow motion off to the west here. So again, it's going to be this relentless pounding there in the Bahamas that goes on starting tomorrow through Monday and into Tuesday, and then the storm gets awfully close to the coast there in Florida. So that's when we start feeling those effects, those tropical storm force winds. But then it is expected to lift to the north, and beyond that, again, may have direct impacts in South Carolina and in North Carolina towards Wednesday and Thursday of next week. A lot to watch with this storm. We are going to continue our live coverage all night long here on the Weather Channel.
Welcome to our extended coverage of Hurricane Dorian. Breaking news right now, the new advisory on Hurricane Dorian just came out. And what we have that's new is tropical storm watches now for the east coast of Florida. Mike Bettis here. And Mike, you're looking at the new data. You've had a couple of minutes to look at it from the National Hurricane Center. Not a lot of changes in terms of strength or direction, but we do have those watches up now.
Very few changes. The wind speed is the same, direction's the same. We're a little bit closer to the Bahamas now, only sitting about 170 miles away from the Bahamas. We do have these new watches that are in effect right now. Still remains a Category 4 hurricane, so we haven't seen the intensity pick up at all. A new Hurricane Hunter aircraft has taken off from Keesler Air Force Base, and it'll be on its way. It'll be a while before it gets there, but we'll get some data a couple of hours from now. Again, 150-mile-per-hour winds moving west at 8 miles per hour right now, so it has made the turn today. 170 miles now to the east of the Bahamas as we speak, but you can see an incredible eye on this thing right now. I mean, it is just a buzzsaw right now. Again, from the center to the westernmost islands here is roughly about 170 miles or so. So as of right now, it is on track to head right for the Bahamas. But notice the cone here, and it's made that turn today. More of an easterly track today. Doesn't mean that Florida is completely out of the threat zone here, because we're still within that area of uncertainty here. But tomorrow, look at this, 150-mile-per-hour winds, remains a strong hurricane through the Bahamas. It still remains a Category 3 just off the coast of Florida here. But that turn, taking it more northbound, may mean that there are certain areas of Florida where you might be in less of a threat zone. Nonetheless, new tropical storm watches in effect here from basically Boca Raton up to Vero Beach here. That includes Sebastian Inlet, and then down toward Boca Raton here. So Deerfield Beach, you'll be included in that as well, which means within the next 2 days, anticipate tropical storm force winds in those locations that are highlighted there in yellow. An incredible eye on this thing. That's a visible satellite. Doesn't get much more intense than that right there. The stadium effect, where you're narrowed down at the surface and then it widens toward the top of the hurricane. You can see right down almost to the ocean surface here. A little bit of swirl inside that as well, but an incredible storm right now. It's just a completely well-formed storm that's maintained its intensity over about the past 24 hours or so. And then you look at this view. Look at how the dry sinking air is right in the middle, the green indicating moist air, and then cold cloud tops at the very top of this. And the steering pattern is just generally coming in from this direction as the high pressure has been impinging on it. And that's why we have the western motion to it right now, as a low pressure that's been sitting over here in the Gulf of Mexico is going to start to give way. And that's why we've had the westward movement here. As far as intensity, it may stay very strong here for at least the next 2 days, if not longer. One of the reasons is we have very warm sea surface temperatures right now, 85 to 90 degrees, so plenty of fuel for the storm to go. And you take a look at one of our more reliable models, the European model, and look at the trends here now. Every single member of the ensembles here has it off the coast of Florida right now. So in some regards, you're breathing a little easier. Doesn't mean you're completely out of the woods here, but the track keeps it at least 100 miles, at least the center of that track keeps it roughly 100 miles off the coast of Cape Canaveral here. Buoys measuring 8-foot waves here north of the center, but notice this, the wave forecast is going to be intense here, could stay over the Bahamas for roughly a day, and then as it comes north and emerges, look at this area in here. That could equate to wave heights greater than 40 feet. Storm surge, a huge issue for us, we believe, here in Nassau. Nick, why? 10 to 15 foot storm surge is possible for us here. We're going to talk a little bit more about what happens once it gets past the Bahamas and what it could mean for the southeast coast, including the Carolinas.
All right, thanks so much, Mike. And right now, here are a few other things that we know. Hurricane warnings have been posted for the northwestern Bahamas, including Nassau. Evacuations have now begun in the Bahamas, and most major resorts there are closed. Remaining tourists are being sent to shelters at schools, churches, and government buildings. Mandatory evacuations for Brevard County, Florida, will start at 8 tomorrow morning. And South Carolina, the governor there, Henry McMaster, has declared a state of emergency ahead of Hurricane Dorian. So a lot of things that we know, a lot of things that we still need to know here in the coming hours, and we hope to learn those here very soon. Of course, that emergency declaration in South Carolina allows the state and local emergency agencies to start staging along the coast. And on the coast right now of Florida is our own Jim Cantori, live in Stuart, Florida. And Jim, even if we don't get a direct hit, a landfall in your area, we're certainly going to feel some effects.
We are, actually, Nick. And, hey, we are moved out to Hutchinson Island, just FYI, from Stuart. So we've come east onto the Barrier Island and through here, which, by the way, as of this morning, had a mandatory evacuation set to go into effect tomorrow at 10 a.m. That has been lifted for the moment. All right? In other words, that is not going to go into effect. But here's the takeaway for you guys here. We are still in parts of the cone, number one. We have a tropical storm watch now issued here. And if you overlay the cone on the tropical storm watches, which are essentially the Treasure Coast, areas south of the cone actually have the tropical storm watch. So what that means is these are now impacts expected outside the cone, which will be the Florida coastline. So even though, yes, a lot of the guidance, as Mike was talking about, is off to the east with the European ensemble members, and really a lot of the reliable guidance, which is what the Hurricane Center's track now lies on. It is pretty much right on consensus guidance in terms of where it's going to go, the center point of that. There's still uncertainty in that off to the west, and that leaves Florida, if you will, in this. So what we're expecting then certainly are tropical storm conditions within 48 hours as that watch has come up, and there certainly will be impacts to the beaches. Huge waves, huge surge, certainly, coastal flooding and coastal erosion, especially with this king tide going on, which means all tides down here are running pretty much above average. So, yeah, something to certainly watch on the beaches in through here. But right now, the big news out of Martin County, which is where I'm at, is the mandatory evac for the barrier island has been now put on hold for the moment. They will reassess that as we get into tomorrow morning. Again, guys, we're asking an awful lot of a 150-mile-an-hour hurricane to come west, stop, make a turn to the north, and then start heading off to the northeast. That's a tremendous amount of energy and certainly a potential disaster lying on our hands. But the takeaway for you is even though the center point of that track may remain offshore, especially for Florida, there will still be impacts to these beaches and along the coast, and they could certainly be of the tropical storm variety, Mike Bettis.
You know, Jim, one thing that a lot of people might be thinking about right now is Hurricane Matthew, which basically paralleled the Florida coast, and it just hammered the beaches. They got absolutely destroyed in some places.
Yes, they did, especially up towards St. Augustine. That area got absolutely crucified. Heck, Mike, you remember Irma? Irma went on the west side. You were in Naples, I was in Fort Myers. We had issues on the east coast of Florida with Irma. So, there's such a large wind field, and that wind field, when it starts to slow a little bit and potentially weaken and unravel, is going to expand outwards. So you're going to get a bigger wind field, I think, than what you have now as the storm nears Florida. So remember that, even though it's away, the wind field's expanding west. That's why those tropical storm force watches, because of that expected size, are outside the cone right now.
What's interesting, though, Jim, is
we often see that, Mike,
in the the latest advisory, the wind field actually contracted a little bit. But it's not going to stay that way. There's things going to slow down, as you mentioned, over the Bahamas. It's going to park itself there. And even though now that the center track of the Hurricane Center's forecast is right down the center of the model guidance, which it was always trending west, it's now come way back east. That's a good sign. But again, with the wind field likely to expand off the coast of Florida, that still means for many of us, wind will be an issue.
It will be an issue. Waves will be an issue. Dangerous surf will be an issue. Maybe even some sporadic power outages, depending on what kind of gusts we get. Mike, you know as well as I do, you set up in one of those rain bands, and it's gusting 30, 60 miles an hour. You could easily get some power outages here on the beach. The other thing, too, and Carl said this earlier, the Bahamas are going to get creamed, the northern Bahamas. I'm so glad they're taking this serious, and the fact that they're going to sit in this thing for about 36 to 48 hours is unbelievable. New hurricane hunters heading out there now. Now, listen to this, a couple of missions going on. Not only are you going to be dealing with a low-level invest, but also they're going to do the high-altitude surveillance aircraft, which is going to give us a nice grid over this. It'll tell us what the current steering is. That fresh input goes into the guidance, and we should, of course, see that reflected in the evening model run for us tonight, or the 2 a.m. model run. So cross your fingers again that everything stays the same, and certainly the center, which is certainly the worst part of the hurricane, stays offshore. But there will be impacts to the Florida coastline, no question about it, whether it's just waves or wind and waves. They're coming. We'll just see how the coast reacts to it in terms of emergency officials.
And as you mentioned, Jim, boy, we are going to see a beating there in the Bahamas for sure. The northwestern Bahamas already under hurricane warnings, and we're seeing many residents of the islands not taking any chances. They're evacuating their low-lying homes by boat. Many are trying to reach shelters being set up in schools and churches in Freeport. 400,000 people live in the Bahamas, and the majority of the population of the Bahamas right there in New Providence, in Nassau. This is where we're live right now. Northern shores being evacuated there, the tourists being sent to government shelters. And so we're finding that, that all of these places in the northwestern Bahamas are going to find themselves right in the feeling the brunt of it. So Mike Bettis joining me now. The hurricane warnings are up now for Grand Bahama, for
Great Abacox here.
That's going to be
Cat Island right here. These are all going to be within the realm of hurricane force winds for roughly 24 hours. That is an eternity.
It really is. It really is. And surge, of course, is going to be a big problem here. Great Abaco is going to be right in line, first of all.
Right in the heart of
What is it, 170 miles
So we're only 170 miles away. And you think about, I think about Freeport, or I think about Nassau, these cruise ships that go into there. There could be damage to these marinas, to some of these docks. And so they've all changed their itineraries. All these cruise lines have changed their itinerary. But look at that. That is just absolutely incredible. And it's looked like that, Nick, for the better part of a day now. It's barely changed.
And you mentioned how close it is getting to the islands right now. So it won't be long before we begin to see the onset of those tropical storm force winds, and then, of course, the hurricane force winds.
If you look real close, especially at the dark reds in here, a little bit of it was exposed on the northwest side, but notice now in the most recent, boy, we've got a completely circular ring around that. The eye wall hasn't changed in appearance, so it has really sustained itself. You know, a lot of times with these smaller systems, they'll waver up and down in intensity. This one has barely done that. From yesterday evening to now, it's basically maintained its strength the entire time.
And we've got those hurricane force winds about 30 miles outside of the center right now. These are the current winds. Not much to talk about yet, but it won't be long before we begin to see those both the wind and the waves kick up here as well.
Yeah, the waves aren't bad yet, but again, it's still 170 miles away. That's likely to change here as the waves come in, especially here from the west and north, or excuse me, from the east and northeast side. And this is of huge concern.
Yeah.
10 to 15 feet of storm surge is going to put a lot of places underwater.
Yeah, some of these islands are only about, 5, 6 feet? Yeah, it's just completely covered. Well, we want to check in with Alex Wallace right now. He's live in Deerfield Beach, Florida, another area, Alex, that could feel the effects even with a brush by of Dorian. You've got a lot of folks there waiting to see. What are they thinking right now?
Yeah, that is it. It's sort of a wait-and-see situation, as you mentioned here in Deerfield Beach, where that latest advisory came out from the National Hurricane Center, now putting this area and points to my north under a tropical storm watch. And again, it's because that possibility is still there for tropical storm force winds. Remember, a hurricane is not just an exact point. Those winds do extend far away from it. So even with a path that takes the center east of this location, we still could feel some of those impacts. So that is still certainly a concern. But as you said, folks are out. This is Labor Day weekend, and they don't want to let that go by. They want to enjoy it, and they are certainly doing that. And no doubt that shift to the east has allowed them to breathe a little sigh of relief, but still remain vigilant as well. I do want to talk to, though, one of the owners of this establishment, which is right on the beach. This is Oceans 234. I've got Daniel Rossi here with me, and she owns this location. And Daniel, you've been certainly, no doubt, monitoring this this storm for quite a while. Talk about your preparation here leading up to this hurricane.
Right, so we've been here for 20 years and we know the drill. There's kind of two phases to our preparation. Phase one is really kind of cleaning up the property. As you'll see, we took down our fans, our lights, and just holding off as long as we could till that phase two that we were going to start this morning. But once we saw that 5 a.m. advisory, we kind of held off.
And you talk about that sort of second phase, getting into that phase, and you holding off on that because you saw that sort of shift on off towards the east. What does that second phase entail?
Right, so at that point, we've got to take down our awning, which is a huge job, taking it down and getting it back up, and then secure all of our tables outside, our tables, our chairs, going in the building, taking everything off the floor that could have any potential water damage, and then getting our team safe and getting them out of here.
And of course, now that, again, we're still watching this hurricane, there's still a chance it could certainly move a little bit farther to the west. I'm sure you're prepared to go into action if that was the case.
Yeah, absolutely. We're ready. Inside of like 4 hours, we need 4, maybe 6 hours to get the rest of that, the last of those things done. If we see an evacuation is going to happen and we've got to get out of here.
I'm sure right now you're happy to see the folks that are populating the restaurant right now.
Absolutely. We're happy our team's able to work, and we're happy to have a busy bar and people can enjoy the waves that come with this storm.
All right, well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Good luck. Hopefully this thing stays away, but we will no doubt be monitoring, and that's the key thing that we want to drive home here for you. Again, people are enjoying their time on the beach now, but this thing is still out there in the waters of the Atlantic, and it is moving west and hoping that turn takes it towards the north and east away from the east coast of Florida, but that is not a certainty at this point. So folks still who are prepared want to continue to remain prepared and watch and monitor the latest updated forecast on Hurricane Dorian. We've got plenty more to come. Live coverage coming up next.
Work's more fulfilling. Carpool's more
of clouds surrounding this aircraft on all sides, just towering up here from inside the wall. Boy, you're not going to get a view anywhere else than that. Welcome back to our hurricane coverage. Hurricane Dorian, this monster, going to bring life-threatening storm surge, devastating winds, and heavy rain. And there's still a lot of uncertainty as to where the storm may go. That's why up and down the coast of Florida and even into South Carolina, people are getting ready. There's a frenzy over hurricane supplies. Gas lines are stretching around the block, and people are boarding up their windows. Now is the time to prepare, and it's good to see the preparations ongoing here in anticipation of Dorian. Our Jim Cantori joins us now. He's out on the beach there, just east of Stuart, Florida. And Jim, a lot of folks, no doubt, waiting to see when or if Dorian's going to make its northward turn.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked to a few folks today, you know, Nick, and they were saying how they got a lot of their preparation done over the last couple of days. Because think about it, I mean, Florida's been in the cone for a while now. And so they just said, you know what, we're going to go out and enjoy the beach today a little bit and come out and relax a little bit. Of course, now we've had some showers to move through, but welcome to Florida, right? That's the way it goes. We are on a little place called Refuge Beach, which is kind of interesting. You know, typically when you think of Florida beaches, you don't think of, you know, rock outcroppings and things like that. This is kind of a coral mix with limestone and things like that. So it's a lot more rocky, if you will, but you can get down to the beaches in spots. But what's really cool about this beach, and the reason why it's named Refuge Beach, is because, you know, when ships would wreck offshore here, there would be homes and actual you know, proprietors that would go looking for shipwrecks and people coming on shore. They would either be swimming or taking boats on shore from the shipwreck. And there's one of those houses left out and through here. So hence it is still standing and has obviously a lot of history with it, going back to the 1800s when these were actually built in through here. But in terms of what's going on with Dorian, okay, you're talking about what yesterday was going to be a mandatory evacuation for this part of Mountain County, which is the barrier island. And now that has been lifted, or at least put on hold. So it's been, I can say it's either lifted permanently or lifted temporarily. They will redecide on that tomorrow, Nick, as to what they're going to do. But no question, you've got a real powerful hurricane out there. One that, amazingly, Mike Bettis says, I look back 36 hours ago, we were at ground zero, and now we're on the western fringe, and we could be dealing with tropical storm force winds instead of winds at 145 miles per hour. So things have changed dramatically in through here, but at least for Florida overall, it seems to be for the better at this point.
Oh, absolutely. You know, where there was a point in time we thought potentially, you know, in that 5-day cone, even the Gulf of Mexico could be in play. I think, you know, the short-term forecast has behaved as we've expected here, Jim. Not a whole lot of surprises between the time it left the Virgin Islands to where it is now. It's after that, and after it leaves potentially the Bahamas. Let's give you an update, though, on what's happening right now. We'll get back to Jim here in just a moment. 150-mile-per-hour winds with this hurricane. Still remains a Category 4. Pressure has not changed a whole lot today, so if you're going to see the pressure drop some, you'll probably see a corresponding increase in winds here. We'll get more data from National Hurricane Center coming up later this evening as the hurricane hunters are out there right now. But you can see an incredibly intense storm right now, and tropical storm watches in effect right now from Boca Raton up to Vero Beach. That is new as of the 5 o'clock advisory that was issued. And as far as winds go, hurricane force winds only extend out about 30 miles from the center and about 105 miles for tropical storm force winds. So it's not a terribly large wind field at this point, although we do anticipate it to grow. And I'll show you more on that here in just a moment. But notice here now what the trend is with the forecast track here. We're taking portions of Florida out of the cone now, including Miami. But notice how the intensity still remains quite high here all the way through Tuesday. We're staying a major hurricane, but a northerly turn here expected once it comes past the Bahamas here. And still now, the Carolinas completely in play still. You're in the cone now. Wouldn't even completely rule out a landfall here. Now, what's pushing on this? What's pushing its west? We got high pressure that's basically sitting here, and it's really steering. It's pushing from this side, and that's why we've got the westward movement right now. We've got low pressure over here that's starting to retreat. So what's going to happen is it's going to find a little window in here and then a weakness and turn itself northbound here over the next couple of days. But on the water vapor imagery, you can see a very well-defined eye with the sinking air, the warm sinking air right in the center. And if you look at the European ensemble models here, these are very reliable models. Look at the turn. Every single member of that model keeps it off the coast of Florida. Again, the Carolinas potentially still in play. I'm going to circle this. There's the wind field, if you will, with the spin on this. And I'm going to leave that there. And watch how it finds that weakness, then turns itself northbound here. And by Thursday, look how the wind field has expanded and certainly puts the Carolinas in play, Nick. So a lot of questions still to be answered longer term in this track.
All right, thanks so much, Mike. And coming up, we are going to answer some of the questions that you have been asking tonight. Just tweet us at Hurricane Questions. We'll get to them.
You'll bring in the waves and the sets of waves, but you're not going to have that water rise that's on the right side of the hurricane that remains offshore. So you're not going to get that big surge component in through here. But unlike our friends in the northern Bahamas that are going to deal with that. And, you know, Mike, a lot of people think about, the Bahamas. Well, they're an island. Typically, the water will flow around. But a lot of people don't realize that bathymetry that near the Bahamas starts to come up a little bit. So it really piles up the water there. And they're going to deal with hours and hours of storm surge. So, yeah, the whole reason I'm here is because we were in the cone as of 36 hours ago. We're still in the cone, but we're not in the middle of that cone and potentially dealing with the right front quadrant that you and I just spoke about. So, like we're seeing now with the states of emergency up through South Carolina, we will shift with the possibilities of this moving north as well.
All right, Jim Cantore, thanks so much for that update. And you mentioned the Bahamas. They are really facing a direct hit from Dorian. And many residents of the islands aren't taking any chances. They're evacuating their low-lying homes by boat and gassing up.
We already battened up all the windows, and we got a lot of water. Make sure that we have water and food. Right now, I'm going back to the store again and get some other supplies, the last-minute supplies. And we just gotta be, take it one day as it comes, and be safe. That's all I can say. Tell everybody to be safe.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do, too. Live look at Nassau in the Bahamas. Just a beautiful shot here. Glorious sky conditions and just beautiful water here. But the northern shores are already being evacuated. Tourists there are being sent to government shelters. And it's good to see those preparations because, Mike, looking at this monster storm bearing down upon them, hurricane warnings are up, and they're certainly going to see hurricane conditions for a long time.
It could be scary, especially considering the slow motion that we're anticipating, right? So we've got the hurricane warnings in effect here. That's going to include Cat Island, Nassau, the Abacos here. It's going to include Grand Bahama Island here. The southern Bahamas, because it's not an incredibly large storm, it's a small to medium-sized storm. You may get out of this in very good shape. The northern Bahamas, completely different story.
It really is, and we could even take a direct hit. We think, it's only about 170 miles from the center of Dorian into Great Abaco Island. So, it's not going to take long for this to get there, but it is going to take a long time for it to make its exit.
Yeah, the problem is, and with the latest guidance that we have, it looks like it comes into the Bahamas, sits there probably all day on Monday. We could be in hurricane force winds for 24 straight hours. Think about that. It's going to feel like a marathon. And then finally, it's going to find a way, we think, to turn northbound here, but the damage will be done by then.
Yeah, not much clue as far as winds right now, but those, of course, will be on the increase. The waves will be on the increase as well. These are the wave heights right now. We don't have any buoys right near the center, but close enough there to see those 9-foot waves. And, of course, surge is going to be a major factor.
This is incredible. 10 to 15 feet of storm surge here in the Bahamas. There are a lot of very low-lying beaches here where they're going to take in a lot of water. Not to mention it's going to be moving so slowly, they're going to get a ton of rain out of this. So you're going to get it from the surge. You could get up to 2 feet of rain on top of that. So flooding a huge concern in the Bahamas.
Of course, we're watching things developing there in the Bahamas. We're also watching how things will continue to develop into Florida. Alex Wallace is live in Deerfield Beach, Florida. And Alex, you're out on the beach right now. And boy, look at all the folks out there maybe trying to get in some beach time before things change.
Yeah, you said it, Nick. I mean, it's Labor Day, that last sort of unofficial time of summer, and people are trying to get their time in. Behind me here, folks are strewn out on the beach. You got the lovely pier as well behind me as well. So people are no doubt getting out and about and enjoying their time. Still weary and watching what is going on with Dorian, but nonetheless, as things are really a picture-perfect day, enjoying what's going on now. One of those folks that is enjoying their time here at Deerfield Beach is Julie Ives. And Julie, you are a resident of West Boca, and you decided to come out here. Now, before you decided to come out here, I'm sure you've been monitoring what's been going on with this hurricane. How have you guys prepared for this hurricane?
Okay, so we took it slow and steady. Monday, I started preparing, doing everything. And then by Friday, I was like, wow, I'm free and clear. We've never put up metal shutters before, but I did it all week. And I said to my husband, you have one job. And that one job is make sure the generator runs. And that generator did not run yesterday. So at 5 a.m. this morning, he was at Lowe's getting a new generator. But you know what? We've been here close to 20 years, and we know I still don't feel confident that this is going to move over. So we're going to prepare, we're going to be there. Like I said, it's a sigh of relief, a very cautious sigh of relief that, you know, maybe it won't hit us, but in the meantime, May girls are sunshine with a little bit of hurricane, so.
There you go.
I'm keeping my guard up.
Keeping that guard up. And thank you so much, Julie. We certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And stay safe, you guys.
Absolutely. Everyone, and I think that's the prevailing theme here, is that folks are no doubt breathing a slight sigh of relief, but also just remaining cautious that this thing is not completely out of the woods, and we're not completely out of the woods, so staying vigilant and staying prepared. That's what we want to do here on the east coast of Florida. We still have those tropical storm watches that they are up from Deerfield Beach northbound up towards Sebastian Inlet. Nick, we'll send it back to you there in the studio.
Oh, good to see that, Alex. Yeah, hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. That's what we're doing there in Florida. Yep. We need to do the same, too, in South Carolina. You know, here's a live look at Charleston, South Carolina, with a little bit of rain on the lens of the camera right now, some clouds over you. This is an area you need to keep a close watch on Dorian, because we are looking at a very real possibility of storm surge, as well as heavy rainfall and wind conditions developing, too.
I think a lot about Charleston, how they flood. They get just nuisance flooding from a high tide.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, you've got all these inlets for water to come in and around the battery. Not to mention, they're very susceptible to heavy rain. And we think both of those things could be in play in coastal South and North Carolina, unfortunately. I want to start here by showing you what's going on as far as the track of this and what it may do, and the players here. So high pressure, this really has been the dominant feature. That's what's been steering this small hurricane. But as that high pressure and the low that's been sitting basically over the Cuba area, as they start to diverge a little bit here, they start to weaken and move, then that allows now for more of a northerly turn once it comes past the Bahamas. But notice here, that puts it dangerously close to the South and North Carolina coast here. Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Wilmington, Cape Fear.
From the general in charge of the Army Corps to Governor Brian Kemp in Georgia, we had conference call with county officials, city mayors, legislators, and we've, you know, I think we're communicating very well. I also spoke with President Trump, and he assured me that Florida will get whatever assistance that we need. The 5 p.m. advisory issued by the National Hurricane Center placed places on Florida's east coast from Deerfield Beach to Sebastian Inlet on a tropical storm watch, which means that tropical storm force winds could arrive within 48 hours. This is likely to be expanded further north very soon to include places north of Sebastian Inlet in Brevard County, Volusia, and up the coast. So Floridians on the East Coast need to be prepared. If you have a plan, stick to your plan. If you haven't made preparations, please do so. We need to remain vigilant. We are not, certainly those communities are not outside of the cone. We just did a brief with Ken Graham and the state meteorologist, and they've actually moved the forecast slightly to the west. Not a huge difference to the naked eye, but they're starting to run models that bring it closer or even on to Florida's coast. That could produce life-threatening storm surge and hurricane force winds. So it's still too early to determine exactly where that may go, but we're not out of the woods yet. So our posture here has been, we're encouraged by the last 24 hours that have seen the forecast be pushed off Florida's coast, but we're also preparing for the fact that cone of uncertainty still includes a lot of areas on the east coast of Florida and even into central and north Florida. So we are staying prepared and we are remaining vigilant. We right now have the Florida Highway Patrol deploying 3 aircrafts to monitor traffic over 75, 95.
Florida's governor updating residents on the situation there and the latest forecast. Jim Cantore is there in Florida near Stewart's, just out toward the beach. And Jim, we've been listening to the governor urging the Floridians to just continue to stay vigilant, even though that cone of uncertainties moved a little bit. Still, there could be some major impacts.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get tropical storm force winds here. Probably a duration of about 24 hours of that. We're going to get water and waves that'll be piling up on the beaches, so they're dangerous. And here in Martin County, which is where I am on Hutchinson Island, we have, basically a curfew on the beaches that started at 5 o'clock tonight. Now, the one bit of good news is they are not going to allow the mandatory evacuation to go into fruition tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. That was the plan this morning. They have postponed that. Potentially postpone that for good. But that is something they've definitely postponed at this point in time. So a bit of good news there. But you're right, Nick.